There are milestone years in many of our lives. For example, Sweet 16, or instead, in some cultural traditions, 13 or 15 marks the passage into adolescence or adulthood. In the US, 21 comes with additional legal privileges. And by 25, drivers are less penalized on car insurance and rentals. For others of us, ages such as 30, 40, and 50 hold their own significance, with the rounded zeros at the end of each of those ages signifying an entry into a new decade. Aging itself is universal. It's something that we all do so long as we live, but neither the process of aging nor its social meanings are universal. Instead, what is acceptable or expected of people of different ages varies from place to place, from one country or culture to another, and varies by the elements of our own identities, including our race, gender, religion, marital status, and more. Today's webinar invites us to embrace aging and challenge the sometimes overt or implicit age bias that limits our contributions to our careers and communities. Instead, as our theme announces, we can thrive advancing at every age. Good morning and welcome to Forward. I'm Andrea Williams, Director of the Women's Place and Interim Associate Vice Provost for Diversity and Inclusion here at The Ohio State University. Forward is our annual symposium to bring together thinkers, advocates in campus and public audiences to share best practices in promoting women's advancement and gender equity. Today's program, like all others offered throughout the year at the Women's Place, is open to people of all genders because we have a saying that what's good for women is good for everyone. Housed within the Office of Diversity and Inclusion, the Women's Place works towards four goals: enhancing an equitable campus culture, increasing the representation of women, other underrepresented employees, and their allies in critical leadership roles, influencing university policies and practices to make Ohio State a place where women and all people can make their best contributions, and reporting on the status of women to advocate for their progress. We also value our partnerships with aligned organizations beyond the university. So I want to extend a special welcome to our off-campus partners and friends who are joining us from other higher ed institutions, businesses, and nonprofits. The topic of this year's Forward Symposium arises as a response to a few striking findings. In June 2023, Harvard Business Review published an article with the headline, "Women in Leadership Face Ageism at Every Age." Co-authors Amy Deal, Leanne Zbinsky, and Amber Stevenson conducted a study with over 900 women leaders who attested to being perceived as either too young or too old to wield power and deserve advancement. While this and other studies are bolstered by empirical research, many of us know personally the experience of ageism, the stereotypes and discrimination based on age, whether in our workplaces, social media and entertainment culture, or even in our own families. Our aim today is to raise awareness of the stigma and equip attendees with practical strategies for extending access, opportunity, and dignity to people of all ages. We hope to make this an engaging discussion, so feel free to use the chat function to share your own resources and responses there in the chat. Please also enter your questions through the Q&A function, and that's located near the center of your screen. We'll get to as many live questions as possible today. Today, we have invited an excited slate of speakers to address this. First, our opening panel is called "Age is Only a Number," and it draws aging experts and skills development professionals from across Central Ohio, to discuss the attitudes and practices that best serve us as we age. Then stay tuned for our noon keynote with Ashton Applewhite, author of This Chair Rocks, a manifesto against ageism. At this time, it's my pleasure to introduce the moderator of our panel, Marissa Sheldon. Marissa is the director of the Age Friendly Innovation Center and Age Friendly Columbus in Franklin County. A two-time graduate of Ohio State's College of Social Work, Marissa identifies one of her biggest achievements as her ability to inspire the next generation of those working in aging. As someone who aspires to grow older herself, she is dedicated to ensuring the voice of older adults grounds community change to create more livable communities for all people. Marissa, the floor is yours. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much, Andrea, and everyone at the Women's Place for bringing this together. It's a fantastic opportunity to be here and lead this panel. I have to share that early in my career, I actually had the opportunity when I was with the College of Social Work many years ago to share an office suite with the Women's Place. And from those early days, I was always impressed with their work and their impact across campus. And when I was reached out to about this opportunity and the topic today, I was just so excited to have such an impactful partner in raising awareness of ageism in our communities, and just commend the Women's Place on recognizing this as a critical issue to tackle. Age Friendly Columbus and Franklin County is a part of the World Health Organization and AARP's network of livable communities. We join over 800 communities here in the US and nearly 2,000 across the world to make sure that we're creating communities and a world that works better for people of all ages. Just as the Women's Place says, what works well for women will work well for all of us. We believe that creating a world that works better for older adults truly works better for everyone. Our work does this by addressing areas of improvement across all aspects of an older adult's life, whether that be transportation, housing, community connection. But we do all of this work grounded in knowing that we need to educate on and reduce ageism. We make this a central commitment of ours for a few reasons, but a really critical data point was humbling to learn when we completed alongside our partners in 2021, the Central Ohio Regional Assessment on Aging. And that shared with us that folks 50 plus here in Franklin County, about 71% of them believe that there are negative stereotypes about what it means to age in their own community. Similarly, beyond our own community, we know that ageism has real world impacts. Here in the US, we know through the phenomenal research of Becca Levy that ageism leads to an excess cost of $63 billion of healthcare spending annually. Let that sink in. This figure is in stark contrast to the way we actually spend to support older adults in our community, at 29 times the annual spending or annual budget at the federal level for the Older Americans Act. We also know that internalized ageism has real world impacts, taking over 7 years off of our lives. And for me, what this means is that we all need to start dismantling this internalized ageism early in our life. In particular, those who have their age intersect with other aspects of their identity, whether that be gender, race, ability, or sexual orientation. We all have enough barriers to thrive in our world, and I do not believe that we should let age be one that we impose upon ourselves. When I envision dismantling this ageism, what it means is starting where you can in very simple places. And one of those places I've committed to in my life is never making or participating in ageist jokes. We've all heard them. Oh, it's my 29th birthday again, or I've been working in this field for 25 years, so that means I started when I was 2. Unlearning ageism in our communities and ourselves is no easy task, and I humble myself on a daily basis to continue this growth. And I invite my colleagues to challenge me when they hear me say something ageist. And I hope you all see today as your challenge or your invitation to be challenged and your invitation to lovingly challenge those in your life and shut down those jokes when you hear them. And the very wise words of our age-friendly assistant director, Christine Happel, aging. So cool, everyone is doing it. This phrase says it all to me. Let's all celebrate the beauty and joy that comes with one of the few shared experiences we all have in our lives. It is now my pleasure to introduce or allow our panelists to introduce themselves. So ask them all to unmute and join us. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining me today. And we'll have you just start by introducing yourself and sharing a little bit about why this is an area you feel so passionate on talking about today. Abby, you're first on my screen if you want to start us off.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. I'm Abby. I'm a gerontologist. I have my master's in aging and health from Georgetown, and I'm in the 4th year of my doctorate in gerontology. So aging is near and dear to my heart from being a family caregiver to studying it. And so I understand the impact that caregiving has across the life course, as well as aging and the impact it has on policies.
Oh, sorry, I muted myself and then didn't unmute. Beauty of technology. Christian, I see you next on my screen.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Christian Johnson. I currently serve as the program manager for the YWCA Columbus in the Leadership and Social Justice Department. Aging is very important to me, just for a multitude of reasons. I have the privilege of not only engaging with women in our community from middle school all the way up until the age of late 40s, but also just in my own journey of just understanding how my age has played a part in just everything that I've become a part of, anywhere from just being in school to just matriculating through the professional world, and how age becomes a very, how age is seen as something that deems to be more important than what I feel as though it should be. So I'm really excited for this conversation with all of the fellow panelists. Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Dr. Sierra Austin King, and I have the privilege of serving as Regional School Improvement Coordinator for Diversity and Equity at the Educational Service Center, Central Ohio. And I also have joint lecturer appointments in the Department of Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies and African American and African Studies here at OSU. And I am passionate about this topic because I am a lover of all things intersectionality and social justice. And as a millennial caring for aging parents, this is something that I think about and attend to each and every day. So thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for being here. And Sophia, I see you've unmuted, but I'm not seeing your face with us quite yet.
I'm not seeing my face either. But if you can hear me, I'll go ahead and introduce myself.
Thanks, we can.
So my name is Sophia Pfiffner. I am the CEO of the Columbus Metropolitan Club, as well as the chair of the Women's Fund of Central Ohio and the chair of the Ohio Crime Victims Justice Center. I am so thankful to be part of today's conversation. And when I think about ageism and aging, I think it's a really critical conversation for the entire Central Ohio community. There I am. Nice to see everybody. I think it's incredibly important for all of Central Ohio because for me, most of my work focuses on connecting people to community, helping them advocate for themselves. And I think that advocacy is something that one should be embraced not only when you're 3 years old, but all the way to 97 and well beyond. And learning how to do that, whether it be in community or in a workplace setting or in a volunteer capacity, this is a really critical topic that doesn't get discussed enough. So I'm excited to be part of today's conversation.
Thank you. And so glad to see you join us in that way with your face. We're going to go ahead and start with our questions. And as Andrea said, there is a Q&A feature that you can drop questions in that we'll try and get to towards the end before the keynote. want to start the conversation around the workplace. We know that a multi-generational workplace has benefits both for the individuals in that workplace and for the business. And I'm curious to hear a little from our panelists about how you see this multi-generational workforce playing out. How do you see younger employees relating to their work? And do you think that's similar or different than other generations? Sierra, do you want to respond to that one?
I'm more than happy to. I really love this question. As a millennial, I hear a lot of my peers articulate work as something that they do rather than who they are. And their relationship with work is mediated by philosophies of boundaries and balance. And research indicates that we place less emphasis on achieving seniority or longevity than previous generations if the culture or the pay don't meet our expectations. I think overall, we don't expect to stay at one or two employers until retirement in the same way that our parents and grandparents did. And for millennials and Gen Z, I think COVID and the economic downturn have led to the phenomenon of, quiet quitting or acting your wage, right? That we've been hearing so much about over the last few years, instead of waiting for that elusive raise or promotion, right? So I think we care deeply about our work. We care deeply about upward mobility, but we also have very astute understandings of capitalism, of corporate greed, right? And we heavily weigh those costs of climbing corporate ladders or striving for tenure or other forms of advancement that go against our personal core values, very heavily. I think millennials and Gen Z are also the generations that have demonstrated higher investments financially and emotionally in mental health, right? So if our job or our career isn't aligning with those things, these two generations are least likely to stick around. I also think identity plays a huge role in how we perceive diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace, and that's inclusive of ageism, right? We're amongst the most highly educated of the generations, and massive student loan debt aside, I think that while we're not the first generations to major, minor, and identity studies fields like women's and gender and sexuality studies or African American studies, Latino studies, disability studies, queer studies, in academia and higher ed, we're seeing more students in our classes than ever. And so we're using lived experience that's grounded in theory to identify and speak out against discriminatory practices in the workplace, which I think is really important. And then I think, too, over the last few years, we've witnessed and participated in a ton of identity-based movements for social change. I mean, we've seen Me Too, we've seen Black Lives Matter, we've seen labor strikes and unionization movements. So I absolutely think it's important for us to work in places that espouse our personal values. And to, for example, hold our workplaces accountable to all of those carefully crafted DEI statements that sprang up after the murder of George Floyd, so that they aren't just a performative checkbox type of thing, right? I think research also indicates that both generations, millennials and Gen Z, have phenomenal representation on identity-based ERGs. Those are employee research groups and equity committees, and committees of that nature. And we've seen a proliferation of requests and demands for things like equity audits. So I definitely think that we're attempting to hold our employers accountable more than ever before.
Appreciate that, and hope today is a catalyst to do that around aging as well.
That's right.
Christian, were you gonna share something as well?
Well, Dr. Sierra did a wonderful job. I think the only thing that I would really add is to the point of, we're living in this space of it's okay for us to explore everything that we are. We're currently living in a time that provides space for us to not only have to be able to focus on one gift, right? So we went to school for this thing, we have to go to school, we have to get a job in this area, and this is the only place where we can stay. And so what we see, or what I believe we see specifically with millennials, is the ability to be able to explore everything that I want to be a part of, right? So, there was, a slight mention on like this hustle or side hustle culture. I am the queen of the side hustle, right? So like, I love, my job, but I also have 3 other jobs outside of here because they allow me to tap into all different parts of who I am. And so one beautiful thing I will say here at the Y is they support that. They say like, get your job, like we appreciate you being here, but we also know that you're a whole human outside of here. So we want to make sure that we're providing space and providing opportunity for you just to become all of who you are. We don't own you, right? And I think that's the unfortunate part about a lot of companies is they feel as though once they hire you, they own all of you. They own all of your time. They own all of your intellects. They own every part of you. And when you I think what the younger generation, is just saying like, no, you don't own me, right? I own me. I own every part of, being able to forge a path for myself. And I want to be able to do that. I want to make sure that, every part of me is able to be emptied before I leave this earth, right? Because we saw so many people come before us, be in the position to where there was still so much untapped potential that they did not feel that space was provided for them to even to be able to explore. So I think that's more so what we're seeing. We talk about social media, and that's a whole nother conversation, but what really happens is, it's the opportunity for you to see like, well, what if I do want to become a photographer on the side, right? Like I do have this passion of being able to, turn my selfies and make them look amazing or whatever that may be, right? So we're just in a space that allows more exploration. And I think that's something, because it may be a newer idea to older employers, that it's kind of a challenge to navigate at times.
Appreciate that. And just leads us really well into the next space that I was hoping we could chat about, which is that future work environment. What are those things that we can do here in Ohio to better retain, recruit, and support an intergenerational workforce? And Abby, I'd invite you to share a little bit on that.
Thank you, everyone, for setting that up so well. So again, piggying off about that, we have such a huge multi-generational workforce, especially in Ohio, where we have at least 5 generations of workers. So, starting with Gen Z all the way to silent generation in their 70s and 80s working. And some are choosing who are older to work because they need to financially, and others find a passion in continuing to work. And so again, the policies to support them is very important. And so some of them, again, like we talked about earlier, was that having that diversity, equity, and inclusion policies to include age is very crucial to kind of limit the age stereotypes that we see throughout the workforce through all ages. So we see, younger generations of workers, they can be a stereotype for maybe not being as experienced as older workers. And, with technology, a lot of older workers sometimes face that discrimination and stereotypes because they're older, and technology comes to play so much in that role with jobs. So again, I would say bringing in manager training, education about ageism, and education around that could be really critical to helping all employees see the need and the reason for having that kind of training to benefit all employees. I would also say that with working, there are different preferences now, with younger workers versus older workers and what they're looking for. And so, younger workers might have different needs for benefits compared to older workers. And I think it's really important for employers to look at that, maybe through research and surveys, to see what are younger workers looking for when they want to sign on to a job versus what older workers are looking for. And so a really great study with the Global Coalition of Aging, they said a lot of millennials will choose a lower pay if they were going to have a positive impact in their job or the community. So that's really interesting. So again, when you're looking to recruit and retain these workers, it's important to look at specific job needs across generations to see what you can do specifically to cater to those employees. And so that's kind of where I would start to go, but also just helping your older employees, especially caregivers who maybe had to stop working and then came back into the workforce. How can we better support them in the field? And maybe that's transferable skills or mentorships or internships, different things like that we can help, because they did serve a job. Family caregivers, about 73% of the workforce are providing care to a child, an older adult. And so if they do have to leave the workforce, which they do a lot of times, coming back into the workforce is important so we can better educate them to be successful in that new role.
I so appreciate that. Yeah,
And
please.
also jump in and just say
Yeah.
succession planning is so important. Like it is vital, right? So often we just stick people in a role and we don't teach other people coming behind them or cross teach within departments. And I think, it's one of those times where even if someone gets sick, it's good to have someone else in the department that knows what they're doing. But because we know people are aging out, or, we understand that those of the younger generation may be a bit more transient, it's going to be very important that we are, cross-training, that we are doing the succession planning. And I think that's, just a very small piece that a lot of organizations just miss, understanding like, you're hired to do this job. We trust you to do this. We're going to be hands off once you're hired. But actually, it hurts the organization as a whole if we're not, looking holistically as this cycle is going to continue to happen, and how we can strategically place people in roles that allows them to be cross-trained in multiple areas.
So appreciate that. Thank you so much. And I want to honor, Abby, something you said around the stereotype piece. And while generational cohorts and talking about things from this generational perspective can be helpful, it can also lead to us talking in stereotypes and want to avoid some of those ageist traps that we might end up in. And I appreciate you raising that question of caregiving, and kind of leads to that next piece that we want to talk about. And we know that our needs change in a workplace across our lifespan. And we want to think about the employee benefits that best serve women during different phases of their life, whether that be their childbearing years, whether that be when they're caring for parents or other loved ones, maybe it's menopause. And just invite you, Sophia, to share a little bit about what you think we can do to better offer that support across the lifespan, and for folks who are not a part of those traditional American family structures and might be unpartnered or not have children.
Yeah, what an exceptional question. I was hearing from my other panelists, thinking about my own experiences as a millennial and how frequently I've made career transitions or evolutions very much connected to the needs of my mental health or my family's well-being. Mm-hmm. And when I think about the landscape of the nonprofit sector, government, and the private sector, what I find is that in a lot of corporations, they actually have pretty more opportunities and policies to support aging at different phases versus the nonprofit or even the government sector. But some tactical things that I think any institution or organization can really lean into is, one, comprehensive parental leave policies. I left a role because there wasn't access to comprehensive parental leave policies. And as a working mother, it was really critical that I had an opportunity to support my family while also supporting for my well-being, my family's well-being. Flexible work arrangements. This is something that I think is very much driven by the manager and their relationship with an employee. But I think it's really critical that all workplaces have flexible work arrangements. If you have responsibilities, caregiving responsibilities, whether that be for an aging parent or for younger children, being able to adjust your schedule to accommodate their needs is really critical. Healthcare support, I'd be remiss to not strongly recommend having access to reproductive health care at every stage, especially here in Ohio. Child care assistance, elder care benefits, all of those are really critical resources. But above all else, I'd actually like to, because when we think about benefits, sometimes these benefits are really critical. However, it's really hard to implement them when you don't have a culture of belonging to begin with. So before any of the benefits, taking off what Dr. Sierra Austin King was sharing, that DE&I statement, if you're truly committed to it, how are you living it? How are you teaching your managers? How are you teaching your employees to create spaces of belonging? So if someone does need to pick up their kids at 3 o'clock, they don't feel shame or guilt for leaving to take care of their family, or if they need to take additional time off to care for their aging parents, that they have a work environment where people see that, acknowledge that, and work with them as a holistic individual.
I appreciate that. And I think you're right. It is more than just those traditional benefits. It's really around the culture. And I'm curious if you can speak to, we can all imagine this world without ageism and what that would look and feel like, but the harsh reality is it's still here. And so what advice do you give folks who are experiencing that in their workplace or in an interview?
Yeah, so I would say 90% of the roles I've had, I'm the youngest person in the room, or I'm leading a team of a very diverse group of individuals, from individuals who are 18 years old all the way through perhaps the tail end of their work or professional career around 70. So a few things. One is education and advocacy. So participating in conferences like today's is a wonderful way to understand what resources are currently available to advocate for yourself as well as advocate for others. Seek mentoring. Sometimes it's hard when you're experiencing ageism, whether you are an older adult or a younger adult in a work environment, knowing is this ageism? Like, is this actually what's happening? I mean, I felt that way. And I've always leaned on mentors, whether that be community mentors or professional mentors outside of my work environment, to give me some third-party perspective. Last, document everything. So it's really critical in any work environment that you're making sure that you have documentation of what's happening or what you're experiencing. And then last, engage HR. HR professionals are there to be helpful and to help guide conversations. And again, if you're not receiving the resources that you need, perhaps you work for a very small organization. I know that there are a lot of external organizations and individuals that people can lean on for additional HR guidance if you're experiencing discrimination from an age perspective.
Appreciate that, and just also appreciate that acknowledgement that ageism happens no matter your age. We've probably all experienced the moment when someone said, well, you're too young, or you're not old enough to know that or be here. And it's also complicated because ageism presents itself with both positives and negatives. We think about older adults and often the stereotypes are around wisdom, or you think about younger folks and you think about vitality and energy. And that is a positive, but still ageism in practice. And just appreciate you calling out that across the lifespan.
Absolutely.
I'm going to shift us away from the workplace and just think more broadly about our communities. And in some ways, the attention of the age of our political figures and public servants is a really heightened talking point. And I even catch myself working in this all the time, falling into those traps. And we are often hearing about candidates that are too young or too old. And I just hope that we can all move away from that language and that framing of folks and invite our panelists to reflect on how we can do that and what that means for them.
I can hop in really quickly. So as someone I've run for office 3 times at this point, so I've for sure understood the scrutiny of being called too young. That is, at the time that I was running, I was 29, 30, and 31, right? So I was for sure running as the youngest person. My opponents were a strong, 20, 30 years older than I was. So that was the basis of a lot of the attacks that I received, aside from being a Black woman and, all of the other scrutiny that I endured. What I realized, though, through all of that and just getting deeper into politics, is I had to understand that my age literally had nothing to do with it. It was a tool that was used to try and demise my experience. And what I really would love for us to focus on, instead of focusing on age, because honestly, just like, the topic, like age has literally nothing to do with it. It is about experience. It is about drive. It is about passion to actually do the work that you are advocating for. And when I was running, I had to, just tell myself that age really had nothing to do with it. I had a passion and I stood behind the pillars on which I was running on, and the ability to be able to connect with the constituents, being able to understand on a personal level what you were advocating for, and that is where the real gap lies. There's a very large empathy gap. There's a very large comprehensive understanding of even what a lot of politicians may be speaking on. There's a very large connectedness to the community, right? And so all of these things have nothing to do with the age, right? I lived and I grew up in the area that I was running for office, right? I'd matriculated through the systems. I worked there, right? So my experience far surpassed my age, but that was still something that, my competency level was questioned because of my age, right? When I could very well outspeak any of my opponents. So, it was a very interesting dynamic when we're realizing, and that was, something that I often had to bring up was we tend to focus on something that is very trivial instead of exploring something that exploring the real needs and the necessary conversations that need to be had. So I would just encourage anyone who either decides to run or, since we are in the heat of a voting season, to take a step back and, really assess the candidate as a whole person, age aside, and really do deep dives into, what they are saying, the message they are actually portraying, and if they are true to that age or not.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that reflection and your own personal experience. I was at a conference at OSU not many months ago, and the interim director of ASA, the American Society on Aging, was posed a similar question, and just loved her response that it was a cheap shot. Age is a little easy, and let's be a little deeper in our reflections about the folks that we are considering for elected official, and talk about track record, and talk about policies, and talk about care for people, and just appreciate that reflection. Curious if any of our other panelists wanted to respond to this one as well.
Yeah, I started my career on Capitol Hill working for Senator Voinovich, a Republican, and then most recently worked for the city of Columbus supporting Mayor Andrew Ginther. And what I've learned from working for both Democrats and Republicans is that when looking at candidates, really strong candidates, their age doesn't matter. As shared earlier, what really matters is their advocacy. How are they showing up for community? What ideas do they have? It's hard sometimes, especially if you're a younger candidate, you don't really have a track record. And if you're an older candidate, you might have a very long track record. But when I'm looking at candidates who are really effective, who can actually get things done, they're candidates that can bring people to the table, bring all voices to the table, build consensus, and then also compromise. And those are things that it doesn't matter what age you are. If you have those skills, then you're probably going to be a leader that can get meaningful work done to support the individuals that you're looking to represent.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. And I think about a conversation I had with one of my colleagues in the age-friendly space out of Pittsburgh, Laura Poskins, and she reflected about when you elect someone, you're actually electing their ability to build a team. And you're thinking about just beyond that person, who are the folks they'll surround themselves with. And then when we look at our elected officials, it should be a representation of our communities. And our communities do have older adults, but they also have young folks and middle-aged folks. And so how do we build a representation of that through our elected officials? Appreciate those. I know we've talked a little bit about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and those commitments from the organizations and businesses in our communities. And the terrible reality is that only about 8% of those DEI statements actually include age when you look across businesses. And I hope we can change that. But I'm curious to hear a little bit about why we think that's missing and why that hasn't gotten the same attention, and what are the next steps that we can do to encourage that or change that within our culture. Sierra, did you want to?
Yeah, sure. I think this is another great question. And I think the answer is unfortunately very simple. And it's simply that as a culture, we don't value our elderly. A lot of other countries across the globe place a higher social value on elders than we do here in the US. And a lot of industries and sectors, unless one represents the mythical norm, right? So that's white, male, straight, able-bodied, ageism is real. I say this because no matter the industry, we kind of tend to regard white men of mature ages as sages, as having a lot of institutional knowledge, as being wise, being a reputable authority, et cetera. And there's absolutely no shade here. I've had some very supportive white men sponsors and supervisors, but this is something that they all kept in mind as a DEI champion working with a Black woman, which I've really appreciated. But overall, I think we erroneously perceive people of a certain age to be less competent, as Dr. Williams has stated in the chat, or to be less tech savvy, like Abby mentioned earlier, or less, whatever. I could go on and on. But of all the protections in place for workers, the Age Discrimination Act of 1967 is anti-discrimination legislation that we just don't talk about, we just don't reference, we just don't keep it in mind. And I think one possible step to combat this kind of really harmful ideology is to bring it to the fore. So when we see ageism happening, like Marissa said, this can include interrupting ageist jokes when we hear them, because that's absolutely a microaggression and a form of discrimination, right? Another is to make sure that the ERGs and committees that I referenced earlier exist, and that the experiences and needs of our more mature colleagues are known and that they are met. A great example of this that I've seen in practice is with an organization called AmeriCorps. And you've got senior citizens working alongside college students and recent grads. And it adds so much nuance and perspective to the K-12 students that they tutor and serve. And the team that I have the pleasure to work with is really attentive to the needs of those older colleagues and their experiences with marginalization and the other intersections that they might have, and the model just works really well. I also think that we all must remember that a lot of categories, a lot of identity categories are fluid, which means that we can all experience them at some point, even if that point isn't right now, right? So we've talked about the average retirement age increasing, cost of living continuing to rise, inflation being high. And if we all have enough birthdays, ageism in the workplace is something that we can potentially all experience, right? And every worker has the right to experience the benefits of inclusion and belonging in an equitable workplace, which includes being age-friendly.
Thank you so much. And I would just open that question to our other panelists as well. If you have any thoughts on how we push forward and include that across our DEI statements, or kind of those next steps for our organization.
I would say that one thing that I think, again, is often overlooked is just basic leadership skills and communication skills. Because if you can't talk about ageism in the workplace, then it's going to be really hard to identify it and then provide concrete solutions that help the entire organization thrive. The organizations I feel where we're able to create spaces of belonging and tackle issues connected to either gender equity or ageism are those where I feel the leaders really lean into empathy and create open spaces for dialogue.
And I think that's really important, and the words we use matter. And if you're interested in learning more in this space, I can't encourage you enough to check out Reframe Aging. The work that comes out of the Gerontological Society of America and the Reframe Aging Institute really does help us think about our language when we talk about older adults, and when we discuss what it means to grow old in our communities. It's a really great resource that could spur some of that. We're hitting that point of some audience questions. I think I see some coming through. I'll pose this to all of our panelists, so please feel free to respond if you feel so moved. Sarah Allen asked, after being too young for years, I am now older, 55. Thank you for that age drop. And find that my circle has changed. Some women retired and others left, so now I'm starting over. How do I build a new circle of women? And how do we let women know that they will be a certain age one day too?
Gee, I actually think that this concept of building friendships as women is something that I feel I struggle with at every single age, whether I was 22, I'm 37 right now. I'm sure I'll probably be thinking about this as well if I have the opportunity to live until I'm 55 or 88. And for me, where I found success truly is in community. I volunteer with a lot of organizations that have women who participate that are very like-minded. And I've been able to make some of my closest friends from participating in their events or workshops or trainings. And, and by friends, the friends that I have are, some are much younger than me, some are much older than me. And I think that creating that space of different ages within my friend group has been really beneficial to not only my growth, but hopefully theirs as well.
And have to just note that our longevity and our health as we age, there is a very strong correlation to our community and the social networks that we have as we age. And I'm just a huge fan of those intergenerational friendships, and I think those are really, really important. Any of our other panelists want to reflect on that question? Happy to move us to the next one if not. We had an attendee who asked, how do you work through situations where ageism and ableism both show up? They're important to distinguish and also are deeply intertwined. Thinking especially about older electeds and people using their age and perceived disability to question their mental and physical capacity to lead. It's a great question.
I can take a stab. I really appreciate that because we're getting into kind of some intersectional analysis here. So we're not simply talking about age, but what happens when that intersects with ability, what happens when it intersects with gender or race, right? And so I think that's always a really important analysis to think about. And so, like Sophia said, I think keeping HR abreast of any type of discriminatory practice is always good, but I keep pushing those employee resource groups and committees, because oftentimes it's easier to bring issues of discrimination to leadership when there's a team of people instead of just one. So this idea that there's power in numbers, I think is important. And as we advocate on behalf of specific groups, it kind of makes it easier to do advocacy for other groups who might be experiencing different forms of marginalization or oppression in the workplace. So I think that team ethos is really important.
If I can jump in just really quickly, I think Sophia also brought up a good point. It's just that open communication, right? So like leadership's going to play a very large role in when any form of intersection starts to take place, right? That empathy that leadership is able to embody, right? And then what that those lines of communication allows for whomever may be feeling that they are being mistreated at any point of their intersection to be able to go to their leaders, and then leaders have that added sense of empathy. But just this open, culture of communication of if it's not talked about, it's always going to be overlooked, right? So if we're not having these conversations, if we're, if we become adverse or apprehensive to any type of comprehension, we're already creating a workplace where if anyone experiences any type of mistreatment or just as they navigate life, right? If any type of their intersection decides to show up at any point in life, if we've already created a culture where we don't talk about nuances in people's lives, then we're already going to feel a deficit, right? So that, that can come in when, going back to the earlier point, as far as asking those questions during the interview, right? Like, how do you all handle these type of intersections? How do you guys, have you all created a cultural norm to where ageism or ableism is accepted and well talked about, right? So interview, the person who is interviewing you at the same time as you are being interviewed, because that allows you to understand, like, is this a place for me? Is this somewhere where I can grow and thrive, and that's going to accept all of me before I even enter into that space? It does kind of go back to that, and this is my younger hat, but also if I feel as though this is no longer a safe place for me, right? So if I've been working somewhere and it is no longer a safe place, it is no longer a place where I feel as though I can be my full authentic self, then I am more than likely to leave, right? After trying to go through, HR, being involved in the different resource groups. If this is something that I realize that this is not a company culture where we accept any of this, being human is really what I like to say. It's just like any part of me just showing up being human, then I have to find somewhere that allows me to be who I need to be.
Appreciate that. And I'm just curious to kind of reflect back and ask our panelists a little bit about from the employer side. What do you see as the ways and the spaces that employers can signal their inclusivity, whether it be around age, whether it be around disability, when they're posting jobs, when they're screening candidates? What would those things look like?
Yeah, so going off of that, you've talked a little bit about the age-friendly space, especially in cities and communities, but I think this can be at play here in the workplace as well. So I know with COVID, it's transformed the space a little bit with allowing more hybrid and remote schedules, flexible scheduling, be able to work from home, being able to use devices when you're at home on your own computer. But I think with the landscape in the office, I think by making it more of a universal design, it could help benefit all ages. You talk about it in the city with the curb, it could help someone who's pregnant or with kids in a stroller, someone with a cane, a wheelchair, on crutches for a broken leg. So if you could implement that in the office space too, wider doorways, more ADA compliant, just making it more acceptable for everybody, no matter your age, your disability, your cognition. I'm thinking about people with memory issues later who are customers, different things like that. Again, to keep it a very inclusive kind of culture, making sure the sound is good, that you can hear people when they're speaking. So again, just little implementation policies that can go a long way in the actual workspace, I think could bring a lot more collaboration as well.
Thank you. I'm going to move us to our final audience question just to make sure we stay on time. And Carly asked, you mentioned being in a job that allows you to be your full and authentic self. I think this was for you, Christian. As a Gen Z/millennial cusper, I don't see that as possible in the corporate setting. Can you speak to what this has looked like for you looked like you to when you first entered the job space versus now?
Sure. And I am going to be very transparent. So when I went into the workplace, right? So we've always had these, especially being a Black woman, right? So I've always had these characteristics that have been told how I should show up into a workplace, right? I should be very subdued. My hair should be a certain way. I should not be very loud or opinionated. These are I shouldn't show my tattoos, take my nose ring out, right? Like these are very much so nuances that have been told to me my entire life, right? Even especially my undergraduate is from a historically Black college and university. And so like that is really where it got driven into me. This is how you should show up. This is how you should be in order for you to be noticed or heard in any type of space. This is how you're going to get your voice heard. Got my graduate degree from a PWI, and I learned that that is not necessarily always the case because my counterparts did not have to do that. So I was very much so in a place of contradiction, right? I had, I was raised to, have to show up at a certain way. But then, what I realized when I went to a predominantly white institution, I had this conflict where, my counterparts didn't have to do it. So why did I, right? So I tried it. I tried the whole, this is how I should be. My first job, I was prim and proper and I did everything. And I did not feel like I was even myself at all. I realized that when I had the inability to show up as my authentic self, I did not perform as well as I could. I was not able to be as much as an asset to the organization as I had hoped to. So when I left that job, it was an internal conversation with myself. Of how do I want to show up in the world? How do I want to make my voice heard? Does how I look and how I speak have anything to do with what I am able to provide, right? And so I sought out institutions from that point on that only allowed me to be who I was. I wasn't, from the time of the interview to the time that I got hired, I was not going to be anything but authentically myself. And what I realized is when you show up authentically, it allows space for everyone around you to show up authentically. And when that is the culture of whatever organization you find yourself in, then that is then that is where you can really thrive and be all of who you are. So it really is a personal decision. I am someone who, will walk into any space and just be who I am, no matter who is there, just because this is how God created me to be. And I don't believe that I have to be someone else in order to fit into any space. So whatever space is for me is for me. But that was something that I had to come to on my own. So Carly, I would just really implore you to just say, what is most important to you, right? Like, who are you? Do that self-work of really understanding what is important to you and what spaces you want to be a part of. And as you are interviewing, as you are going into spaces, take an audit of, if this is something that you feel as though will respect all of you, and a space that you feel as though you can really thrive in being who you are.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. It was so well put. Just as was mentioned in the chat by the original question asker. And I just want to close our panel by prompting for all of you. How can folks take this forward? How can they bring this message that they've learned today and heard from all of you into their own spaces and really to these bigger, broader audiences to continue this message? Abby, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. I would just say, again, like we were talking about, have that conversation with your employees, with your colleagues, with your employer, sit down and see, where can we try to make even just a little bit of a change? Where can we bring awareness to age and ageism, universal design, things like that? A little step goes a long way. So just having that initial conversation is really important here.
For me, I think that, this hour-long conversation, we've received a lot of data points and tools and resources to receive additional information. But I also agree. I think that the first step is having a conversation, whether that be with peers in an ERG meeting, with mentors in or outside of your organization, and with leaders on how do you create and build more spaces of belonging and inclusion. I'd like to go back to Carly's question, because I think sometimes, especially as someone who, when I entered my profession, I was like, oh my gosh, I don't want to work for a corporation. They're all awful. As somebody who has worked for nonprofits, for government, large and small, for corporations, large and small, it really does depend on your team and who's around you, which is why I think that, the communications part and connecting with others and leveraging your voice will be so essential. Every organization is a little bit different.
Thank you so much. Sierra, give closing thought.
I think my colleagues and panelists have dropped the proverbial mic, so.
That's perfect. I couldn't. Yes. Christian, I'll open it up for you for one final comment before I close.
I think the common through line for everything that's been said is open communication and understanding who you are and what you're really looking for. So, and when you bring, all of you into the workplace, hopefully, if you are someone who's like a change maker and you're like, I'm going to change this organization, you have to do it with being all of you, right? But if you're already walking into a space where the desire is for the workplace to be welcoming for all, it really starts with wonderful leadership and constant in conversation, hard conversations, right? We can't be scared of the hard conversations. We cannot shy away from them. We cannot think that it is something that we can't touch because we've never talked about it before, right? So if you are someone who is enthusiastic about championing this topic specifically in your workplace, be the one to speak up about it, right? Understand that this is something that you need to take to HR or your leadership, or if you are leadership, then use your power to actually let this be a conversation so when others come behind you, it is something that is already embedded into the workplace and not something that is taboo.
So much. That's perfect. Yeah, I appreciate that. And just a huge thank you to our panelists. Undoing this internalized ageism and the ageism within our culture is the work of a lifetime. It doesn't end here, but hope all of the folks on the webinar today leave today with a new lens, that you notice things differently in our community, in your workplace, and you can start to embrace yourself as you age and help others embrace that. going to take just a momentary break, but we'll be joined by our keynote shortly. And I just have to say that being in the age-friendly space and working in the Aging Network, there is no bigger celebrity than our keynote today, Ashton Applewhite. It is such a privilege to virtually share the stage with her, and just know you are all in for a treat, and hope that we can continue some of those conversations and Q&A through the chat. Thanks so much.